Hello everyone, and welcome to The Good, the Bad, and the Television, where I take a look at everything related to the small screen. Now for today's first episode, I decided to take a look at a Cartoon Network show that not many of you have heard of, especially if you were born in the mid-2000s like I was. So what is this show I'm talking about? Mike, Lou, and Dog, a show that is actually good for kids, but sadly didn't leave that much of an impression for Cartoon Network's Cartoon lineup. It only aired from 1999 to 2001, with 26 episodes and 2 seasons, 13 episodes apiece. And it's not like Cartoon Network didn't have any faith in the show. They actually gave it consistent commercials until the show's end, and even a few years after. And it's not like people didn't want to give this show a shot. There were actually a few people who decided to watch the first few episodes. But very few of those people actually came to stay. As I said, most people don't really remember this show. That is a very bad sign, and a clear indication that you did something wrong. But this show couldn't have done anything wrong, right? It does have some fans, and I even have to admit that it's a really good show, and there are actually far worse shows in the cartoon lineup. Well, it's just the fact that there were more exciting things to come out of the cartoon lineup, like Dexter's Laboratory, the original Powerpuff Girls, Ed, Edd and Eddy, and later down the line, Courage the Cowardly Dog. So this show had some tough competition that it couldn't quite compete with. This show couldn't even compete with the likes of Cow and Chicken, what is arguably the worst of the cartoons. Let that sink in. Well, what does this show have compared to those shows? What makes it work, and how would I fix it? I'll get to that in a little bit, but for now, you're probably wondering, how did I get introduced to the show? So how did I get introduced to the show? Well, first of all, I actually saw a thumbnail for a video detailing the top 10 best Cartoon Network shows of all time. And it used this artwork, which is beautifully drawn. And right there you can see the 3 main leads, Mike, Lou, and Dog. But I really didn't think too much of it. Then I saw a Wicked Binge video detailing about these 3 main leads, which was good, but it still wasn't enough to make me want to watch the show. That is, until I saw a Medium Mementos video. It's this one right here, detailing Trevor's complicated relationship on the show. So then that got me thinking, hey, I want to see this show and see what I think. So I found a place where you can watch all the episodes, and lo and behold, I was actually blown away. I fell in love with most of the characters, yes, even Lou, I'll get to her later. I was charmed by the few amounts of humor the show had, and I actually found this DVD right here. Yeah, so they actually had a DVD release of the show. It was only available in the UK, but thankfully you can find it for dirt cheap. So I asked my mom about it, and then she said yes, and I paid her the money, and lo and behold, a few weeks later, and here it is. Now this front cover may look good, but when you turn to the spine, yeah, this is bootleg quality right here. And then there's the back, which looks better, but we could still use some work. If I could just get the focus, there we go. You can pause if you want to read that. But taking a look at the actual disc, this actually looks pretty good. And at least they gave the copyright to the original makers. And this contains the first 3/6 episodes of the show. And 5 of the 6 are actually really enjoyable. 5 out of 6 isn't a bad grade. In fact, it's a passing grade. But yeah, this DVD isn't really anything to write home about. But if you do want to really find the show, this place is your best bet, unfortunately. So that is how I got introduced to the show. Well, you're probably wondering, what do I actually think of it? Let's take a look at the story and the writing and see what exactly the show has. This show is about a girl named Mike who's moved to an island called Albanquitine, which is called the island where nobody goes. Even though Mike just went there, but that's besides the point. Yes, I know that they described it as having her be a foreign exchange student, but for the purpose of simplicity, I'm just going to say she moved there. Accompanying her is her best friend, an island native named Lou, who is basically Angelica Pickles meets an island native, Og, a 6-year-old boy prodigy, and Lancelot, Lou's pet turtle and the best character in the entire show, and you cannot change my mind. There are other characters featured in the show, but I'll get to them when we get to the characters. Basically, the overall premise of the show is that Mike learns about the islanders' customs, whether it be making literally anything out of coconuts, having grass skirts whenever you wear clothes, things like that. But, in turn, she remembers stuff from Manhattan, and through vague descriptions, Og builds the things that are being described, and then hijinks ensue from each. So already, we have a good show with a simple premise. But the question is, does it work? Does the writing actually make the show worth it? And to that I say, yes it does. The characters never go out of character, and there are actually some really funny moments in the show. Don't believe me? Take a look at this moment with the pirates in the episode Yo Ho Ho.
All right, lads, here we go. A cut, you pick, mate. Bosun! Bosun! For the last time, lads, stop chewing on me wooden leg. Now look what you've done. Me wooden leg needs a wooden leg.
Or how about this scene after Wendell sings his honestly better than it should be governor song?
I helped with the song. Don't quit your day job.
Even the worst episodes can have some really funny endings, such as a learning experience with this masterpiece of an ending.
You know, there's nothing more satisfying than seeing young people aspire toward an education.
To find the truth, one must start down the path.
I wonder if we could start down the path towards a cheese souffle. That was a metaphor. Well, it is quite late. One has to eat sooner or later, and sooner would be good. Philosophically speaking, of course.
I don't know why, but there's something unironically enjoyable about that ending. But comedy isn't what this show is most known for. No, it's the relaxing feel it has. Showing you tropical island settings with tropical island music and the characters just being the characters. Do I mind this kind of show? Absolutely not. Does that make a show good or bad? That's a little different. If a show like this one can balance out its relaxing feel with good comedy, then yeah, it's not a bad show. But if a show has nothing to offer at all, period, or focuses way too much on the sole thing it wants to focus on, then yeah, I cannot bring myself to defend it. So already we have some pretty decent writing. I mean, yeah, it does focus a little bit too much on the relaxing feel, but it does have some elements of comedy to mix in with it, so yeah, I can't really blame it. But what about everything else? Who are the characters, and why should I support them? Starting with Mike, our main character, she's actually pretty likable if I'm being honest. Sure, there's nothing much to her other than her being a tomboy, but I actually don't mind, because having her be the normal girl stereotype would make the show not as much fun. She serves as the straight man, or straight woman, of the trio, and loves reading Action Guy comic books. Oh, you don't know who Action Guy is? Well, let me introduce you. By the way, this is not to be confused with the Action Man toy lineup. Just wanted to get that out of the way. Action Guy is your basic superhero trope. Basically, saving the world, getting into all sorts of, well, action, stopping bad guys, the list goes on. There are some episodes where Mike actually takes on the guise of Action Gal, who is basically a gender-bent action guy. There's nothing much else for me to say about Action Guy, so let's move forward. Okay, now I need to talk about the elephant in the room, Lou herself, the most hated character in the entire show. What are my thoughts on her? Well, to be honest, she's not that bad of a character. Hang on, before you get your pitchforks out, let me explain. Don't get me wrong, Lou was a bad role model throughout the entire show, especially given the fact that she treats her pet turtle Lancelot horribly. But I think she's well written enough to be a good character. For example, her interactions with Mike are hilarious. I mean, you're teaming up a sensible tomboy with a bratty girl stereotype. That to me is just hilarious. Another thing I like about Lou are her facial expressions, particularly this one of her poking out her tongue at the Kozlowitz behind Mike. Again, I don't know what it is, but there's something hilarious about those faces. Some of them can be full-on meme material if done right. And while sadly, yes, it is true that sometimes she doesn't get her comeuppance, other times, not only does she get a severe talking to, but she does some kind of chore to teach her some kind of lesson. To put it simply, there are characters out there I think are far, far worse than Lou could ever be. And those are my honest thoughts on the character. And rounding out the main trio is Og, the boy genius who invents the many different inventions seen on the island. Going back to that Media Mementos video from earlier, I think Trevor did a much better job of explaining Og than I ever could. So if you want to know more, I suggest watching that video. Trust me, it's good. Some of my other favorite characters include Marjorie, Og's mother, and my personal favorite amongst the human characters, the pirates, who are just perfect examples of comedic villains and character chemistry done right, and the Kozlowitz, the islanders from the other side of the island, who the Algonquins do not get along with very well. In terms of who my least favorite character is, there's no contest, it has to be Old Queeks. I hate this character. He is one of the worst characters I have ever seen in any piece of media, ever. He is an unmistakable fraud, he is a liar, his voice is annoying, only in Season 1. In Season 2, Corey Burton did a decent job with the character, and I'm surprised he hasn't been called out for some of the things he said in the series. Heck, I'm surprised he didn't get banished from the island after sending Mike and Lancelot on a dangerous mission that almost got them killed! Holy crap, that is sick! And in the next episode, he sent spirits to go and scare Mike off the island for no reason. Again, that is sick. Okay, he did get his comeuppance in those two episodes and in the episode Sleeping Ugly, which is actually one of my favorite episodes despite being a bad finale to the series, but those do nothing to change my mind on the character. It's the same way I feel about Ren Hoek. Despite being a good character in some episodes, we get back at square one again and again and again, and that makes me hate him again and again and again. You see where I'm going with this? If there's one more positive I could say about Old Queeks, I did find this scene funny.
The way I see it, you can spend the next 5 years in therapy or you can just give up. Personally, I do the latter. Face it, dear boy, your marriage is history. Love on the rocks, what? 2 clams, please.
But one funny scene and a decent performance in the second and final season is not enough to save this character for me. But to end this on a more positive note, I might as well share with you who my favorite character in the entire show is. That would be Lancelot the Turtle. Why? Well, for one thing, he has a lot of personality, being the one who saves the other islanders when they're in danger. And he displays the show's best usage of physical humor, getting into all sorts of cartoony shenanigans. He kinda reminds me of Scrat from Ice Age. But it's not all fun and games. You really do feel bad for him, for what he has to go through, whether it be Lou mistreating him, or that instance where Old Queeks sent him and Mike on a dangerous mission that almost got them killed. Lastly, I know neither Lancelot or the Woolly Wombat talk, but could you imagine Frank Welker being a good voice for them? I mean, think about it. They did make a few sounds in the show, and someone has to have provided them. Why not have Frank Welker do both of them? After all, Frank Welker is a master at animal sound effects, and he is my favorite voice actor still alive today. I'm not kidding, he is currently 76 years old. This leads me into my favorite part of the show, the voice acting. Even if there was a bad character in this show, they were at least voiced by a good voice actor. So let me get to the 2 best actresses in the entire show, starting with Mike's actress. Mike was voiced by actress Nika Futterman. You may not know her name or have seen her face, but you have most definitely heard her voice. This is the actress who voiced Olga Pataki in Hey Arnold, Luna Loud from The Loud House, Catwoman in Batman, The Brave and the Bold, and Asajj Ventress from Star Wars The Clone Wars. Lou, on the other hand, was given a great performance by Nancy Cartwright. I'm also willing to believe that if not Welker, both Futterman and Cartwright took turns doing the few vocal effects of Lancelot and the Woolly Wombat. So that would mean there were 3 roles per actress, meaning that Martin Rayner was not the only one who did more than 2 roles. Speaking of Martin Rayner, you may not know him that well, but he has actually done a few roles outside of Mike, Lou, and Og. I think the most well-known thing he has appeared in is the movie Problem Child. Yeah, I bet you didn't expect that. In terms of the roles Martin Rayner does in the actual show, he voices the eccentric hunter Alfred, who should have been voiced by Tim Curry, Spiny the porcupine, and Mate, the most sensible one of the pirates. So already, we have 3 people who are doing 3 roles in the entire show, and even that's not the most amount anyone has done in the show. Let me point your attention to the very skilled D. Bradley Baker, who, like Frank Welker, is a master of animal sound effects. This is the guy who voices Og, Goat, and 99.5% of the other animals in the show that don't talk. That is amazing! Outside of Mike, Lou, and Og, he is the voice of Number 4 on Codename Kids Next Door, a multitude of characters on SpongeBob SquarePants, and believe it or not, this is the exact same person who provided the sound effects for Perry the Platypus in Phineas and Ferb, one of the greatest Disney Channel shows of all time. You cannot change my mind. The other voice actors include Corey Burton as both Old Queeks and Bosun, Brian George as Captain and Haggis, as Scott Bullock as Wendell and Baggus, Kath Soucie as Marjorie and Pig, novelist Allison Larkin as Hermione, my favorite amongst the Cuzzlewits, and actors like Jim Ward, Greg Proops, and even Charlie Adler have made a few guest appearances in the show. One last thing I would like to talk about in regards to the voice acting is how Lou and Og wound up with American accents instead of British ones, or the debate surrounding it. To that I say, is it really that big of a deal? I can think of one other debate that is even more confusing to me. How did Goat get a Canadian accent? I mean, think about it. Both Spiny and Pig speak with British accents, surprisingly strong British accents, even though Pig's actress is actually from America, not Great Britain. And having Lancelot, the Woolly Wombat, and many of the other animals not talk, it makes sense. Otherwise, it would ruin the entire show. But why, oh why, did they have to have an American actor give Goat a Canadian accent for an American Cartoon Network show that's set on a tropical island in which most of the inhabitants there are British? Yeah, try and wrap all of that around your head. They seriously couldn't contact any Welsh actors like Terry Jones to do the character's voice instead? Perhaps they could have had Jones use the same voice he used for Mr. Creosote in Monty Python and the Meaning of Life. But no, they didn't for some reason. That would have been a really good casting decision if I'm being honest though. So I think honestly, to those people who still wonder why Lou and Og speak with American accents, first of all, you go and answer to me how Goat wound up with a Canadian accent instead of a British one, and also why he, Spiny, and Pig can speak in terms of the story, and then maybe we can continue the conversation from there. I'm just saying. This is going to be a shorter one, but the animation in this show is actually really good. The backgrounds are pleasant to look at, the colors don't hurt the eyes, the character animation is smooth, the character designs look like Rugrats meets Peanuts, which is a very good combination, and there are little to no errors in this show, which I actually like. Of course, the show's best animation can be found in the theme song, which has better character animation and it gives off storybook vibes. Now, how would I change this show? Well, first of all, we are actually not going to have this be a Cartoon Network show. No. I would actually have this be a Nick Jr. show. Now, I know that sounds crazy, but trust me, you can find ways to make Mike, Lou, and Dog work as a preschool show. For example, don't do what Peppa Pig does and actually bore the audience to sleep, and don't do what Thomas and Friends All Engines Go does and be too overly cartoony and fast-paced for them to keep up with. Do something similar to Naughty's Toyland Adventures, a pace that's not too fast, but not too slow either. So here's my premise for the series. Mike, a sensible tomboy, along with her caring mother Shannon and bully twin brother Morris, have moved to the island of Algonquin to get away from the bustling city life of Manhattan, and honestly, I would not blame them. On the island, Mike goes on many different adventures with her best friend and pen pal from her school back at Manhattan, an island native named Lou. Oh, and Lancelot the Turtle would join in on these adventures too, because why not? What I would have this show do best is develop the friendship between Mike and Lou, since remember, at this point she's only a pen pal of Mike, having only interacted at school. Now you'd think each episode would share the same theme of friendship and stuff, but actually no. Yes, there is a theme of friendship, but it's not just about that. There would be stuff like observation skills thrown in there, giving the show a bit of science to teach the kids. Think something similar to Lazy Town, where yes, there is a main thing that it teaches, but there's other things that it teaches in there and intermixes with. That way the show doesn't become stale and that kids can learn two things rather than the usual one. In terms of character portrayals, let's first get into Shannon, since I really like how I wrote her. The way I wrote Shannon for this version of the series is pretty much the same way that Mr. Rogers and Bear from Bear in the Big Blue House are depicted as. Positive father figures who interact with the viewers and demonstrate various different subjects, like experiments, ways to solve problems, and ways to be better friends. And they'll even go into darker subject matter that, for the most part, preschool shows would not delve into. Only in Shannon's case, she's actually a caring mother, who still does that stuff. Lou would be a sweet little girl who gets lost in her imagination when she plays princess, which is about 50% of the time. I would have Alfred not be a hunter, but instead an animal expert, teaching Mike, Lou, Morris, and in turn, the viewers about the many different animals that live on tropical islands. Wendell would be a little less cowardly, with a deep man voice to emphasize that. Hermione would occasionally join Lancelot, Mike, and Lou in saving the other characters when they're in danger. And speaking of which, we could have Old Queeks be the villain of the show. Yes, I know that sounds crazy, but hear me out on this. In my version of the show, the island of Algonquin was a very nasty place before the Manzinskis came around. With the exceptions of Lou and Lancelot, everyone on the island did not get along with each other and there were no moral values around. And the problem was all Old Queeks. He made this happen. But then when the Manzinskis came around, Shannon and Mike, with the help of Lou and Lancelot, turned everything upside down, and now Algonquin is an island where everybody can go to now. But Old Queeks, he can't stand it. No. Occasionally, there will be episodes where he will do everything he can to make sure that Algonquin is reverted back to the island it once was, the island where nobody went to because it was mean-spirited. Oh, and that eagle from the episode Palm Pet, I'd like to believe that that's Old Queeks' pet eagle, and we could have him bounce off of the eagle, because why not? Also, there would be episodes where he would have help from either the pirates or Haggis and Baggis, or hey, sometimes all five. But everyone else, especially Mike, Lancelot, and Marjorie, will remain the same for this version. Now, I decided to do a bit of recasting, but first let me tell you who I'm going to have as the voice director for this version. None other than my favorite voice director of all time, Gordon Hunt. You may not know his name, but you have definitely heard his voice direction. This guy did the voice direction for the 1992 Addams Family cartoon, the first 2 seasons of Adventures from the Book of Virtues, and what's probably his most well-known work, the original Smurfs cartoon by Hanna-Barbera. In terms of my recastings, I would have Nika Furman voice Pig, and Nancy Cartwright voice Marjorie. Now I hear you saying, wait a minute, Steven. That leaves Mike and Lou without their respective voice actresses. So who's going to provide their voices now? Well, I won't have 2 actresses do the characters, but 1. None other than voice actress Russi Taylor. But wait, I hear you say again. Russi Taylor passed away in 2019. How is that going to work? Simple. We're not going to think about this from a current standpoint. We're thinking about this from a 1999 to 2001 perspective. Not only would I have her voice both Mike and Lou, but I would also have her voice Hermione, Mike's mother Shannon and twin brother Morris, and Awful Aunt Lulu, or as I call her, Awful Aunt Lucille. So 6 characters for 1 actress in a show that doesn't have that many characters. That would have been impressive. And speaking of which, the actor I would have do the most roles in the entire show is Frank Welker. I could see him providing the vocal effects for Pig, Lancelot, Woolly Wombat, and 60% of the other animals that don't talk, as well as providing the speaking voices for Old Queeks, Bosun, both Haggis and Baggis, and that nature documentary maker. Other casting changes I would have include the real Tim Curry as Alfred, Tony Jay as Wendell, and of course, Terry Jones as Goat. As for D. Bradley Baker as Og, I'll only keep him under one simple condition. Have him also voice Spiny. Please, have him also voice Spiny the porcupine. That would sound much better. Now, about the animation, keep the animation the same, but maybe have Ralph Bakshi as the consultant for the animation. And that's all the changes I would make for Mike, Lou, and Og as a Nick Jr. show. But I'm still glad we have the Mike, Lou, and Og in the real world, because it's actually good for kids, and from what I've experienced, it doesn't bore anyone to sleep. Besides, I think the passing of time has shown us that Cartoon Network can give us so much worse. Now it's time for my final thoughts on this show. Do I recommend it? Oh yes, I do. If you have a young kid or are in need of a nice relaxing time, give this show a shot. Sure, some things about it have not aged well, especially some of Old Queeks' lines, but for the most part, this is a harmless enough show for young kids. In terms of which episodes I recommend the most, these are the ones I recommend the most, with number 1 being my favorite and number 5 being my least favorite. In terms of which episodes I don't recommend, yeah, you're better off avoiding these 3 any time of the day. Overall, I feel it's best to give this show a 7.5 out of 10 stars. It's not the best Cartoon Network show, but compared to stuff like Cow and Chicken, this could have been so much worse. And that wraps up the series premiere of The Good, the Bad, and the Television. If you've enjoyed this video, that's great. If not, that's perfectly understandable. But I would like to know your thoughts on this show. Do you enjoy it like I do, or do you have a different preface? Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.